I feel so
right.
seen by you right
If I just do everything perfectly, then everything will be fine, and I was using meditation as like a way to be perfect and calm and, and in all of these things align with something that's important to me,
now.
right? Like they aren't wrong, but the wellness culture tells us these are the ways to be good. Part of my burnout was I was honoring my imposter values. So these are values that are given to us by other people, medical, the medical community, society, family, it could be religion. They're values that we've integrated into how we live, but they are not actually what matter to us, what help us feel well, connected, whole.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. We have back on with us today Dr. Sarah Weber. She is a physician and a coach. We are going to be exploring the topic of values today and how the heck you figure out what yours truly are, and then how do you live in alignment with them. Before we do, Sarah, welcome back to the channel.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
And I am so fortunate to have you here with us today to talk about values. And I'm curious what makes this topic so important for you.
Mm. Yeah, so this is a pretty clear memory dating back to when I figured out that I was really burned out and just wanting to leave medicine. That was like the main symptom, I guess, and sign that told me I was burned out, along with, the other things that we commonly hear about. And as I do, I sought out to fix this problem of my burnout, of course. And that, the way that I like to pursue problems is by like listening to things, reading about things, trying things out, seeing what sticks. And back around the time that I was doing this was when the minimalists were really big. I don't know.
Yep, I know
Um,
them very well.
Here.
Yes, we have a lot in common, and that is another thing we can add to the list.
So I was like obsessed with their podcast. This was before the Netflix documentary was made. And I remember driving to see my sister who lived about 4 hours away, and I listened to them the whole way there,
Oh my gosh.
which is, a lot of listening. But I think when I was listening, the reality was I didn't quite know what I was kind of obsessed with or intrigued by. Because I'm not a big stuff person. I mean, yes, I have stuff. I have kids. Like we live in America, there's always too much stuff. But, stuff wasn't a big problem for me. But what I realized now was it was them living life on their terms.
Mm.
And I think a little later on, as I listened to them, they started talking about values. And that was where I really saw this. It was almost like a window into like, how you might live life on your terms, which was at that time like just a foreign concept to me, that you would like do what you want and like on purpose. So that was how I first got exposed.
Is it, and for the people who haven't heard of the minimalist, can you share a little bit more
Oh,
about their background?
yeah. Yeah. So there are two men who I seemingly have nothing in common with. They were like in kind of business management field. I think one like managed cell phone stores. I can't remember what the other one did. I think they were both married and really into material wealth and accumulation of like success in their jobs. And they both or I don't remember who, but there was substance abuse, that they were dealing with mental health issues. I think there were some losses in their family, and they were friends, and they kind of happened upon this journey at the same time of being like, what is my life? Whose life am I living? They had sort of things in their face that made them ask these questions, and so they both essentially got rid of all their stuff and quit their jobs. I mean, that was like the first step, was like
Mm-hmm.
literally as minimal as possible. And but then as you listen to their story, it kind of weaved into just like being authentic and stuff as sort of being a barrier to like a deeper, well-lived life. That's at least how I remember them. I haven't listened to them in a while, but
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I captured too. They had so much materialistic goods. They were
Mhm.
climbing up the ladder and we're sold this belief that the more stuff we own and the more things that show our socioeconomic class to the outward world, that the more we'll feel a sense of fulfillment. And they were feeling more and more hollow. And one of the friends quits first and he's happier. And the other friend goes, how the hell did you get that way? And he
Mhm.
pretty much says, minimalism.
Mhm.
And I had the same thing as that you gathered from it. And it was so fascinating to me because when I was really sick, I thought, like, if I die, anything I owned was going to be a burden on my family. And so now if I have stuff, I got to a point where stuff would make me anxious because I was like, the more
Mhm.
stuff I had, the more, and when I was more sick, I was just more anxious. Now I've accumulated a lot of books. So like books are like my blanket and I've allowed some things back into my life, but we just think about when we pass or if a family member passes, some of the times the family's burdened with having to
Yes.
clean up. And so I'm like, okay, what do we truly want? And then also with the high income earners, well, your spending rate can be really, really
Right.
high. And then people will they attempt to find some sense of fulfillment in materialistic goods. And then they have to work more. So then they're more isolated, disconnected, stressed out in order to afford the thing that's trying to fill this void, which is often a void of disconnection from people. So it's like,
Mhm.
I think that until we lean into like, what am I actually craving? We are often pushing ourselves down the wrong path, which is why I think this discussion with you about values is so important because how do you know if you're on the wrong path if you don't know your freaking values?
Right. Right. Yeah. Which I think at least I knew, and I think they described this, and you and I have talked about it. There's like a central knowing of like something's not right. This is not how life's supposed to be, or it can show up. I do think it's like mental illness, physical illness, or it can just be a sense of like, what am I doing? What's the purpose here? Um, but yeah, I think when you then can articulate the problems with values, right? That's what values do. They put words to these things that are important to us. When you can articulate it, it becomes more clear, I think, cognitively what the mismatch is and what might change to make things better.
Mhm. Yeah. And it also goes into setting, people struggle with boundaries. This is along the same
Yes.
lines.
Yes. Hmm.
And I'm I heard you say that you kind of dove into this when you were feeling burnout. Is that correct? I'm
Hmm.
and I'm wondering how much of that burnout you were feeling was it values misalignment or what was coming up for you?
Sure. Well, actually, yeah, that's a great segue into this concept that I I kind of heard a little bit from them, but I've sort of evolved in my head, which is imposter values. And so I think to me, burnout is kind of two things. I think burnout can come from like overwork, just like too much of a thing. But I think often it's too much of a thing and sort of not enough of something else,
Mm-hmm,
like the
mm-hmm.
combined factor. Because we all know people who work really hard and really love their work. Like I can think of a faculty member who, retired recently. Like she liked reading medical journals on the weekend, and no, she was happy, right? So I think that's why I think it's the combination. Um, so what I realized is that part of my burnout was I was honoring my imposter values. So these are values that are given to us by other people, the medical community, society, family, could be religion. They're values that we've integrated into how we live, but they are not actually what matter to us, what help us feel well, connected, whole. And I call them imposter values because they can really run us around. We feel like we're doing what matters, but it's an imposter. It's not authentic. And if we really look closely, it's not what actually matters. So for me, it was things like urgency, success, um, accumulation of experiences, like wanting to do it all, and success as in like climbing the ladder success,
I knew
CV.
you were a woman of my heart because that was the question. I'm like, so I knew it. That was so funny. You just read my mind. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I
It
love
just
that. No.
baffles me whenever you just feel like you're in my brain all the time.
Oh, we know when we find the people who just is a connection, right? Because I do actually value success now, but it's a different definition,
Yeah.
and that's
How would
self-authored.
you define success now for you?
So for me, success is it does have to do with some material resources that can support like the life that I want to live, but like in a true sense,
Mhm.
in a simple sense, by doing things that are meaningful and that I enjoy. So it's like, yeah, there is some value. I have a family, like I have people I support. So like there is some need for me to have financial resources, but it's this combination of kind of enough, what's enough,
Mhm.
and doing it in a way that feels right to me.
And how do you define enough?
Oh God, right? That's
Yeah.
an ongoing question. Oh, yes.
This is book When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What
Yeah.
We Can Do About It. I'm not on the what we can do about it yet. So
On
stay
the
tuned.
toxicity. This is like, to me, what is enough is like a lifelong question that I ask. Part of enough is like, can I be whole? Can I do this thing and be whole? And to me, wholeness is like all the parts of me get to belong. So I actually was thinking about this analogy recently for those of us who celebrate Christmas. When you like put up a Christmas tree and you put up the Christmas lights and there's like a couple strings that are out.
Mhm.
Like, that's not wholeness. Like
Mhm.
there's some parts of me that are like dark or I'm not giving air to or time to. So like a part of this is can I do this thing and not lose parts of myself that are really
Mhm.
important?
Mhm.
I mean, enough from like a material financial standpoint is like a whole other issue, especially in this country, obviously, with like the what things cost is so challenging for people. And so that's like a definite work in progress.
Especially when we're around a lot of financial fear and like our news instigates the financial fear. And if we grew up with scarcity or even in
Yeah,
medicine, when we have high loans and then we're paid very little and then
right.
all of a sudden get paid, there's a lot of money shame and a lot of money scarcity and our market and our news all they feed into our scarcity mindset. That's how you gain viewers. You instigate fear so then people watch. And like if we understand emotional manipulation and what caters, it's like, okay, what fear is true? And it can
Right.
be hard to tease that apart.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, what I have done up to this point, which I think there may be some changes for this in the future, is I've lived in the same house I bought as a resident. And for me, this has been a way to really put a lid on the money value, like the need or how much money I need so that I could like as I was going through burnout, it became very clear that that increasing my expenses would get in the way of me figuring out what really mattered to me. I didn't want to be locked in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a way that I navigated it, which was by keeping the mortgage, which is a big cost for a lot of people, the same so that I could feel freedom to make choices, even though I actually didn't change a lot. But I could if I wanted to.
Yeah, a lot of it's a mental construct too about like people that feel trapped. I know feeling trapped was one thing that was fuming inside of me when I was feeling suicidal. I'm afraid that that is leading people to feel like there's no hope and no way out. So I really appreciate you creating that space for you. Even if you didn't make big shifts, it created that mental space, that freedom of knowing that you had choice.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was really important to my well-being. In fact, anytime I thought about making a change around our house, because I have three kids, so I had a couple kids in the process, right? There was a part of me that was just like, no, we're not giving up this freedom yet. We're not ready, to do that.
And with
Hmm.
small changes, like I think that that's also what I notice in our culture. You said urgency is no longer that was an imposter value, but the sense of urgency, I've learned that if we actually allow ourselves to slow down, we can get ourselves to where we want to go faster, because the sense of urgency is often leading us to do things before thinking and being very, very intentional, or like we're
Yeah.
going down this path that we think we need to be on. Well, the faster I run down that path, the
Hmm.
further I will be on that path, only
Hmm.
to then realize, am I on the wrong path? Well, if you actually were going slower, it's like the tortoise and the hare. If I was actually going slower, maybe I could have got there faster because I would have been able to pivot and to like check the scenery and see, do I truly want to be still on this path? So I know any false urgency for me that just instigates more stress without
Hmm.
productivity, or like productivity in the sense of meaningful
So,
movement towards something that is impactful. I had a lot of sense of urgency put on me in my fellowship constantly. The first year, I fell for it. Second year was like the boy who cried wolf. It's like, no, I dropped everything I was doing. I spent 20 hours on that table. No one used it for a year. I am done. I am done, because I would lose sleep, because like that people pleaser. And I'd love to talk with you more about how we identify our own values. When I just put out a video on toxic shame, people who were not
mhm.
honored in childhood or even as adults, their boundaries not being respected, they use people pleasing in order to feel safe or accepted. I find it hard for then us to identify, what do I truly want? Am I even worthy of upholding and identifying my own values? And that,
Yes.
I mean, that's a lot to unpack in itself, but just how do we even identify, especially if we feel like our opinion doesn't matter, to then extract ourselves from the imposter values?
Yeah, right. A lot of good points in there. So the way that I invite people to do this and the way that I do it myself is I've sort of pulled things from a lot of places to create what feels like I call it the whole brain approach, which I know that neuroscientifically there isn't proven that we have a right brain, left brain creativity, logical. But I think we all know the difference of when we're feeling creative and when we're feeling really task-oriented, logical, right? There, at least for me, there's like a different tone there. And so the way that I have designed the questions is around trying to really engage sort of the creative, imaginative part of your brain. Because I think if anyone's ever looked at a values list, there's a lot of good things on there.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to be like, oh, I want that one. I want that one. I wish I was that. And, like
Yeah.
it's like you have 27 values because we
Yeah.
all want to be good, right?
Yep.
And all of these things. So the first thing that I encourage people to do is reflect in more than one setting because our work brain versus our home brain, vacation brain, like we show up differently in these spaces. And so giving yourself some different environmental cues, I think is the first encouragement. And then the second is I have people explore four areas. One is think of an imaginary ideal day. And the reason I use imaginary is because people will get real caught up real quick in like, well, then I have to, how do I get over here in
Yep.
time? It's just like, that's not the point. The point is if tomorrow you could do whatever you wanted, what would it look like? And what I find really fascinating about this question is there's a subset of physicians, which is who often I'm doing this work with, who are like, well, everyone would always pick vacation. But
Yeah.
there's a subset of
I
physicians
wouldn't.
who
I wouldn't.
work on their ideal day.
Yeah.
Not all day, but
Yeah.
like do a surgery,
Yeah.
go see a couple patients. And so I think that, first of all, can just tell you a lot about like what how do you really feel about your work right now?
Mm-hmm.
Not
Yeah.
bad or good, just like a check-in.
Mm-hmm.
And what also is fascinating to me is people are rarely on vacation, actually, on their
Yeah.
ideal day. They're
Yeah.
usually at home-ish.
I've never, it's so funny because I've actually, we do the ideal day in Wayfinder. And I've never had someone go on vacation for it. So it's interesting. But yeah, the escapism, I would imagine it's coming from they, that's what you said, I think sounds really insightful is tell me how you really feel about your job right now. Or if they're burnt out, you just fry,
Exactly.
they don't
Right,
even want to think about their job in that ideal day.
right, right. So that's the first question. And then the second is who do you admire? The third is close, but it's who do you envy?
I love that. You said that. I have one of the videos is like, what did I learn from the psychologist that I envied? I actually changed my career because I learned my envy was pointing me to what I truly wanted.
Right. And it's just
Hmm.
so true. Like the people that we envy, it's like what? And you're right. The question is, what does that tell me about what I want?
Hmm.
Because that's what envy usually is, right?
Yeah, we want it. We think we can't have it, but can
We
we?
think we can't have it, right?
Hmm.
And then the fourth question tries to engage a little bit more of like a doing, which is, and this is a common question. Like, think about times when you've been engaged, excited, felt alive. What were you doing? Who were you with? Where were you? And so then after people reflect on all of these, I ask them to like essentially do like a qualitative analysis. I do some research. So what are the themes? What connects? And often people are like, nothing matches here. But once you look, things line up. There's words that show up. And then after then I have them look at a list of values to help articulate, in case they just want that as a support. But that's the process I encourage. And as you can imagine, this is not like a 5-minute process, right? This could be like multiple days. It could be done over a month. Like it's meant to be immersive,
Like a
you know?
contemplative. Yeah. I don't know. I'm gonna write this down. It seems like a very contemplative and then also challenging it with like I think it'd be great to be working with you and like having it challenge. Like you
Yes,
said this, how is it
right.
showing up for you in your life right now? Or is it something like imposter value or is it a true value? How do you know? And I think that the challenge I have, like the how do you know? And sometimes we can go into our intuition, but with the population you work with like my own personal experiences, like my body compass was like, I
Yes.
wasn't even able to access it. It was like, I can't, like, there was, I had to develop that first. The like, okay, I can actually trust my internal cues
Hmm.
and so I think as people are healing alongside and you're supporting them in that, like they might have capacity to access this information in a way that maybe they didn't when they were first working with you. I'd be so
Yeah.
interested to hear how people evolve in that
Mhm.
process.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a good point. I've often thought like in some ways, the main purpose of coaching is to build self-trust, at least in the way that I do it. Like
Mhm.
that's what I see my role as, is to help
Mhm.
people in building their own self-trust. And so, yeah, it's common for people off the bat to pick something like, well, I've always been this way, so that must be a value. And I'm usually, as you know, with coaching, like when something comes up first, sometimes you're just kind of like, like just see where this goes. And so what often happens is as the coaching relationship goes on and you talk about specific situations or specific conflicts, then you can say like, well, how does this relate back to what you said was important?
Mhm.
And I think that's where you can start to build that body compass, that internal compass knowledge of like, how am I feeling right now? Ugh, I feel like really stressed or tense about this thing that I'm trying to do. How does it reflect with my values? It doesn't reflect my values.
Mhm.
maybe this is a sign I'm out of alignment.
Mm.
So it's like the kind of like going back and checking
Yeah.
sort of builds that, I think, body map of like, what does it feel like when I'm forcing something or living an
Mhm.
imposter value or doing something for somebody else or because I'm trying to prove something. So I agree that like coaching is a good container for building that self-knowledge and self-trust because someone is there to help investigate and be curious and pull you out of the spiral, which also is what at least I can do. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
is this me? Is this someone else's idea?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, yeah, because it's all here. We're not used to confirming and I think that is part of, I mean, in medicine for sure, survival mechanism is to detach from your body because your body will tell you like you're not meeting my basic needs. You have emotions. Like there's so much that would be incongruent with the capacity to maintain your stoic presence, which is part of why medicine isn't that healing, is like you take away part of the healing presence of human being human.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, the is so fast. I love that you said that. I think you're that's what I definitely capture is that coaching is one of the big things is helping people even understand they have a voice, like to hear their own voice, to
Mhm.
honor it and know that they're worthy of it actually mattering, and
Mhm.
then to build trust and confidence that their cues, even when they conflict with what they've been taught here, are
Mhm.
something that they should follow. Because I think for most of the people that often come from the high achievement, it's like we're spent so much time up here that they're likely to trust this over this.
Absolutely.
And then it leads us to burnout, moral injury, PTSD, like, oh, mental illness. And I think sometimes it takes that like rock bottom sometimes to be like, oh, well, I've tried everything else. I guess I'll try it. But what if we could like actually do this when we don't feel like poo poo?
Right. Right. So now for me, this is like an ongoing practice that I do for a while. When I was like in, burnout recovery, what it felt like, I was doing it like every 6 months, and reflecting on it a lot because it wasn't integrated. And so this is the other thing that I talk about this more when I t teach on this, when I'm invited to speak, which is like for me, values is a three-step process. It's awareness, action, and integration. So first is the knowing, like this is what matters to me, and I'm starting to become aware of what it feels like when I'm in alignment and when I'm not. Action is I'm going to actually try to align some action with my values. I'm going to try some things out. But the integration is the real true knowing, where I don't have to plan everything. I actually just do the thing that is in alignment with my values. It comes more naturally. And that's I'm probably like I'm closer to that. Like that's again probably an ongoing journey, but for me now in the integration phase, it's just every year around this time, I look again, I do that process. I look again, like what have I said my values are in the past? Often they're the same. Maybe I change a word slightly, but it helps me just kind of like re-immerse in them. And it also it provides some data, which I think helps the doubting mind of like, do these things really matter? Can you really orient your life around it? Because I do that reflective process, I get to the same answer. It's like that scientific confirmation of like, see,
Yeah,
this is what matters to you.
yeah,
You
yeah.
keep coming up with mostly the same things.
Hmm.
Hmm.
How does it feel to you when you are in alignment with your values?
Mm. Freedom, I would say, is the main feeling, which is funny because I'm like, is that then my value? I mean, this is where I can get really logical in ways that aren't helpful, but it's like freedom and then the other, I think integrated, which is a little bit maybe isn't so clear what that means, but it's like all the parts of me get to be here
Mhm.
and my life aligns with that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think integration's a big part of trauma healing, like
Mhm.
the loss of parts of ourself or the shunning of parts of ourself or what
Mhm.
are create obstacles to that true sense of wholeness.
Mhm.
And I love that you said freedom and I think about something that you were saying before, even demonstrating like when a person's having restlessness up here or they're feeling constricted. Most of the times when people are feeling constricted, it's like something's out of alignment. That's how we protect ourselves, right? We're feeling like shame. But expansile and vulnerable, it's like a dog sleeping on its belly, right? It's like when felt, I had the belief that we needed to earn our worth by sacrificing as much as possible and working as hard as possible. So being in flow felt wrong.
Yes.
Then I heard Martha Beck talks about that's how she knows she's in alignment, if she's peace and flow. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. All right, self-compassion is at the root of mental toughness. I don't actually have to like beat myself down. And flow shows I'm in alignment, and that's the actual path to true fulfillment and meaning to our lives. I was like,
Mhm.
if we needed to deconstruct and to detach from societal messaging, like those are clear examples of where we might have been led astray.
Yeah. Yeah, like if it's worthwhile, it's hard. And this comes up for me. Um, so around, I am a person who kind of honors this time of year as an intention setting time. So I celebrate the solstice. My family celebrates the solstice. And so that's kind of the beginning of thinking about a common practice on the solstice is writing what you want to let go of and what you want to invite in. And then we put them in the fire. We put the letting go of in the fire and have kind of a little ritual with some friends. And then kind of through the 2 weeks up until, January-ish, I do spend a lot of time thinking about what I want to let go of, what I want to invite in, how that relates to my values. But something that I found a few years ago was setting goals is just very problematic for me, especially around the new year where it feels I can get that part of me that wants to like do it all really big can just get like too big for her britches. So I'm pretty I'm actually I don't encourage people to set goals around the new year. And I was really validated in this belief or sort of like intuition I had around values when I did some work this summer with the Artist's Way. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like
I
a
do. I
writing.
have that book.
Of course you do.
Uh-huh.
And there's this line in the book where she talks about if you try to live a creative life and enjoy the process, essentially, like that is the purpose. But if you're trying to live a creative life thinking about the output,
Uh-huh.
it will be kind of like barren and whatnot. And that really spoke to me that when I'm too focused on outcome or
Yeah.
output or goals, I can quickly ignore like what actually matters
Mm-hmm.
because I get too focused on that prize. And
Yeah.
this also relates to, I don't know if you've read The Real Self-Care by Dr. Pooja Lakshmi, but she talks
I
about
didn't. I didn't. Look
there's
at it.
a
Look at
book,
it. I didn't. Okay, let me write this one down. What is it called? Real self-care?
Real Self-Care.
Wow, we
She's a
found one.
psychiatrist.
Okay.
And what I really love about her conceptualization of values is that values are a how.
Mm,
And that really speaks to like when I think of times when I've gone astray or down a path that really didn't get me in the direction I wanted to go, was that I wasn't trying to meet a goal in the way that aligned with my values. It's not just the
mm,
outcome, but the
mhm,
process that
mhm,
matters. And so that to me, I think is what's most important is the how.
mhm. And the why.
Yeah, and the why, of course, yes. But yeah, yeah.
I was just thinking and the why because this is really speaking to me about. So I had really bad test anxiety, super bad. Like I would perform fine. And so I ran cross country and track in college, super anxious, like would just self-sabotage the crap out of myself because I was focused on the outcome
Mhm.
and this pressure to be, the best runner, whatever. And what the hell? Like I didn't enjoy any of that because I just felt so much self-created pressure that it would end up in worse performance. And that's what happens with perfectionism,
Mhm.
that we're focused on so much, we could self-sabotage, we procrastinate, and all these things with this illusion that we need to hit a certain outcome, but we don't have control over that outcome. We have
Exactly.
control over the process. And in the focus on the attachment on the outcome, we're actually not showing up for ourselves in the process, or we're creating more suffering. And for me, it's like I could get the grade I wanted, but it caused so much suffering along the way that I
Mhm.
usually would quit things prematurely just because it would just take out so much energy.
Mhm.
Had I just enjoyed the process and the growth, like Brene
Mhm.
Brown separates perfectionism and healthy striving, like had I just desired to lean into it, or decided I'm doing this for fun, for the sake of having
Right.
fun.
Imagine that.
Like I loved basketball and volleyball, and I quit because I was 5'4", and I'm like, well, I'll never be in the WNBA. I'll never be recruited for this because I'm too short. It's like all these things that I was in high school. I play them because you enjoy them, because like you're having fun.
Yes.
Those
Yeah.
those are my regrets from high school.
Yeah, well, right, because there is a message that like the only thing worth doing is something you can be excellent at,
Mhm.
which is, I think there's like a poem about that. Like if the only birds in the forest that sang were the ones that were the best and made money at it, think about how quiet the forest would be.
Oh, wow.
That's not verbatim, but something like that.
Still a great message. Yeah. I think we just like we can learn from envy. What I learned from regret is now capturing when I've abandoned things that I enjoy. Like I love playing the drums. Well, go play the drums. Like, sure, I'm not going to be my uncle who could have been, a famous drummer and he
Mhm.
turned it down to have a family. But yeah, sure, I'm not going to be him. Like I will not, that wasn't the point. I love like the indigenous drumming, like the healing drumming, just like the drumming and shamanic drumming. I just for some reason love that sound. That all my thoughts is like, well, I'm not a shaman. I didn't come from that culture. I can't do that because they're gonna think that I'm like, trying to impinge on their cultural
Mhm.
whatever. I'm like, I don't know actually what they'll think. Maybe if I join them and learn from them, that they'll let me know and I can learn
Right.
oh, what's the appropriate, culturally appropriate role here, or I can just go play silently with I have like a little drum pad. Like, so I've
Mhm.
been doing that. Just
I love that.
like so much drama that just came out. Like literally all of that probably was like one of those times where we're overthinking and just in paralysis and like, let me
Yes.
perseverate on this for a second.
Right. Well, and I think it equates to when we go out then when we're like, okay, these are my values, now let's do some action. That's just another spot where things can get sticky because we can get in we can get caught up in a perfect way to align with those values. So
Mhm.
I've definitely seen that in myself where I think, well, this is my value, so I must XYZ, and that becomes its own issue because it's unattainable or it's not realistic or maybe someday. And so what I'm hearing you say is like you did like a small first step
Yeah.
instead of just saying like there's some resistance and uncertainty here and I want to honor my other values, which is not culturally appropriating things or being conscious of that. You're like, I'm going to take one small step, use my, intuition and wisdom to navigate how I can do this in a way that feels good, right? That
Mhm.
feels right and in alignment.
Yeah, and the whole like shaming and guilting ourselves for not being in alignment with our core values once we've identified what we think that they are.
Mhm.
Like sometimes even values shift and change as we age and as priorities shift. And if like there's some catalytic events that are like, oh, I thought I cared about that more, but and and having, I think the beginner's mind of adopting that beginner's mind and knowing, in my marriage and family therapy, one of our exercises in my class was about how do you know you know? Like, how do we know we know? And it was really investigating where we get our information from, and especially in science, when we're fed it like evidence-based, objective information, though, even in science, the
Mhm.
more information we get, the more we challenge previously held beliefs, the more things change. We don't practice medicine the same way we did before. Like with
Mhm.
my own diagnosis with anorexia, I'm like, wow, the DSM actually causes people a lot of harm. But I used to hold on to it like it was truth, and I
Mhm.
used to use it against myself. And then being in research and just focusing on the breadth of like the way that we investigate questions, there's like a bias inherently in even the hypothesis that we create. And then we have objective data, but we are subjectively analyzing it. And I'm like, okay, I can get really paranoid here that we can't believe anything. But I'm like, or I'm missing a belief. I'm going to hold loosely onto my beliefs with the beginner's mind. Like,
Exactly.
and the things that we think are so solidly true. I'm like, wow, if I was born in that place, like that
Yes.
other region of even our own same country, I would probably think a lot differently. And if I was born in a different country with different belief
Mhm.
systems, like, okay, so
Yeah.
where do we go
Right.
from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's just making me think about, the journey that I've been on, and I'm imagining you too, has been really you can't subtract it from the fact that it exists within this culture of wellness, which has its whole other set of advice and beliefs. And so I think back to a time a couple of years ago. I think it was probably 3 years ago because I think my youngest son was one. So like, not sleep, still not sleeping regularly, like working full time. My husband is working, doing all these things, and I'm reflecting on my values, and I'm feeling, like very motivated, and I'm like, I am going to have dry January. I'm going to eat vegan. I'm not a vegan. I mean, I don't eat meat all the time, but like that's a big leap to just, so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to meditate and exercise 5 days a week. And I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning to do all this. I mean, I think a lot of people would just not set these goals, but this is like the delusion of ambition, right? And so I set these goals, and it becomes very clear very quickly that none of this is realistic. Even the not drinking alcohol, which, I would say at that point in my life, I wasn't drinking a lot of alcohol, but it was, it was a habit that had formed over a long course of time as a way to relax.
Mhm.
So here I am like creating new stress by having more rules around getting up and meditating, eating. And then I'm like, and then something that you do for stress, which arguably doesn't help, but still, it's the way that you do this right now on a Friday or something, is have a glass of wine. And then you're taking that away. It was just, it's so clear now. And my therapist at the time was like, what are you doing? And I remember telling her, I just don't have any self-discipline. And she was like, honey, you have too much self-discipline.
Mhm. That's so interesting. Have you heard of it's like the radical, what is it, DBT, but it's like
Oh,
radically open dialectical behavioral therapy, a type of therapy that treats disorders of over control, where people exhibit a level of self-control that interferes with their ability to function effectively, connect with others, and be flexible when needed.
I mean, this
So
is like the past, definitely.
I was told about this in response to my own self. Somebody is like, "Have you tried this?" And then like a few people, I was like, "Oh dang it! Are they trying to tell me something?" Like because I love DBT. I just thought it was helpful for like understanding our emotions and learning how. But I didn't realize that for like for people who are overly restricted I think it's offered a lot for patients with anorexia. And so that's
Mhm.
where that was the context of which they were offering it to me. But I thought if I just got really good, it's similar to you. You said, I love it.
I just do
I feel
everything
so
right.
seen by you right
If I just do everything perfectly, then everything will be fine, and I was using meditation as like a way to be perfect and calm and, and all of these things align with something that's important to me,
now. Hmm.
right? Like they aren't wrong, but the wellness culture tells us these are the ways to be good.
Yes, virtuous. Hmm.
And the reality was that none of these things were creating self-compassion, which was what I really needed.
You also just answered the question. I was going to say, Sarah, what did you truly need in those moments? Because people are going to relate, like, oh, yeah, I did that too, and I don't know why. And there is a need that's attempting to be met, and it
Yes.
gets misguided. So in those moments, you truly needed self-compassion, yet it showed up in a way that maybe felt more familiar. Or what did you take away from that?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I was I was already had learned to like look at how things went as its own lesson. So as this is unfolding, I'm kind of watching it like, okay, this is very entertaining. You've already broken half of these. What did you were doing, you gonna cook for yourself? Like what, my kids live off cheese. So
Hopefully some Miralax or something to go
right.
with that.
Oh, they eat a lot of fruit too.
Okay.
Um, but what I did is I shifted toward like maybe I just what I actually needed, what I was to feel like I was good enough.
Mm.
Like that was where those things were coming from in that moment, was being good. And to me, whenever I'm feeling like I need to be good, actually what I need is self-compassion.
Mhm.
What's interesting is this year I landed on this idea of what would love do? And that has been interesting to say, like, well, how would I love my body right now? Which is a whole different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Because the answer A offers you to look at intuition or, your physical needs. Am I tired? Am I whatever?
Yeah.
But I think it also supports like what would be seen as like healthy-ish ways of living, but without the like restrictive control, be good.
hmm
It's
hmm
more like, yeah.
Yeah. I have such like, I think diet culture is very oppressive. Like
Yes.
once I think because even I think there's so much shame created by medical culture. So having anorexia while in medicine, while in medical school and in residency was so illuminating for me about how much we shame people and how much shame is inherent. It's like people, we've just been swimming in it for so long that there's so much stigma against people with anorexia, like all these stereotypes because the education's so sparse on what that condition actually entails. There was so much stigma that when I started to look ill, people complimented me for all that and
Mhm.
that just reinforced. And it was really hard to do the opposite of both what society said and what medicine was trying to teach. But it just was so illuminating. And I'm like, okay, why are we fed these messages?
Mhm.
And I think about how much the diet industry capitalizes on people's insecurities. I think it's very emotionally manipulative. So you take people, you create shame within them or instigate this shame that they've already had inside of them. You say that something's wrong with them, and I'm going to sell you the way to make it right,
Mhm.
which is a trap. So I have like my triggering things because the way the dysfunction I had growing up is people who manipulate for their gain and have like hidden agendas. So I'm like,
Mhm.
I think just understanding that and having that become so apparently against anything I want for myself or other people. But in order to see that that was abuse, the self-compassion was important because I thought the shame taught me I wasn't worthy of love. So I had trouble accepting it. So I'm wondering if that was a process for you when it
Mhm.
came to first developing self-compassion and kind of allowing yourself to get to the point where hearing yourself ask what would love do that you could receive it and apply it.
Yeah, it's been a long way. I mean, even a couple years ago, hearing myself say that, I would have been embarrassed. Like, because I think I had a lot of judgment around that, but around talking about things like love and self-compassion, and it was definitely yeah, it was a lot. So I would say the things that changed that over time. I mean, I've been probably like 9-ish years ago is when I started meditating, which was like, I brought all my baggage to meditation. Over time that shifted, and especially when I found Tara Brach, who's really interesting because she's a woman meditation teacher who kind of started teaching at a time when very few women were teaching meditation. And she was in, a community, kind of a high control group-ish situation where, it was all about deprivation and, like stern meditation. And so she started to be like, wait, there's this whole other part of meditation around. So her work's all around compassion, being with emotions. So I think that was like a slow drip in. Definitely going to therapy, I think helps you love
Mhm.
yourself and feel like you're valid and worthy. And then a lot of the things that I've consumed over the past year, interestingly, I find that folks who are LGBTQI, neurodivergent, and minorities, I find that the way that they write about these things has such authenticity. I think there's something about, being in an oppressed group that cultivates a type of self-love that was hard for me to even understand. And so I think like those voices have shaped just how I think about, and within self-love, it's like access to joy, believing I can rest, right? There's all these things that circle around that,
Yeah.
like basic human needs.
And I was just thinking too about some of the places where those voices aren't heard, like the voices we do hear, those people that have overcome the shame, they've turned their anger into advocacy. But even in marginalized groups, that shame, because they're being oppressed, they might start to resent their own self and
Yeah.
internalize it because they may not even recognize them. I was learning about this when I was reading about toxic shame and like, why do I always feel like I'm never enough? And I'm exploring that question. And then like even with therapy, I use therapy against myself
Mm,
for a long time. And even that, it was okay, why did I use the DSM against myself,
mm.
with like, what do I have? What am I dying? What's my problem? What's wrong with me?
Ah,
I
yes.
was the only person in my family in therapy. It was like
Mhm.
now that I'm becoming a marriage and family therapist, I was like, I'm on to y'all. I am on to this. Where also becoming a chief wellness officer and understanding the systemic impact, like it all like you did. It was this slow unpeeling in a way that met me where I was able to see it. So first I had to see that the problem was systemic in medicine. And then I
Yes.
had to see how religion creates the systemic issues that we might have
Mhm.
identified together a little bit earlier. And then also the systems just within profession, the systems within friends. And then I could get closer and closer to home. And I was
Yeah.
like, wait a second, the burden of which I carry was not mine alone.
Yes.
And I said to my therapist, this whole time I thought I was the problem. And he said, you were the problem. You were the one who wouldn't tolerate the dysfunction. And I'm like, that's all the systemic disruptors. They are labeled as the problem because they won't shut up in color.
Yeah.
And so we can become advocates and do it very intentionally so we're not harming others, like not become the problem in that we are creating our message in a way that is, we know that people do acts of violence in order to make a point. But I also heard in Atlas of the Heart, which I have over here. It's one point over there, but it talks about humiliation. When people are humiliated, then that's correlated with violence. And like if we can understand the shame that we're doing to others and why they might hit a breaking point and act in a certain way, we can take ownership and responsibility while giving people compassion, not tolerating injustice, but also just understanding that we're all interconnected in some way because so many of us think it's like, oh, this is me, I'm broken in some way. Like, let's take accountability for what is ours to own while also identifying what's no longer ours to carry.
Absolutely. It's both and. I mean, I made a lot of external changes in my life. I've changed jobs. My husband stayed home with the kids for a few years. Like there were, and those were obviously individual choices, but they were me kind of navigating the system, right? I was making choices within the system that I was in.
Mhm.
The system of like, being a parent in America and the system of being in medicine. Um, but yes, I am really what would be the word? Sensitive to holding the paradox or the both and of internalized systems of oppression are they're external, they're happening. And when we've internalized them, we've created sort of our own prison.
Uh-huh. 100%.
And so it's like
Mhm.
our work is freeing ourselves from the prison we've created, knowing that it's not our fault. It doesn't mean that like things don't still need to change on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that when it comes to coaching and physicians and the pain they can feel. Why would I change when the system's broken? It's like,
Yes.
and the system has often created the sense of learned helplessness. And by empowering yourself to see what you do have control of, how much it can free your mind to say,
Yes.
I do have agency and autonomy. I am choosing to show up. What is true about the negative impacts of the system on me? Yes, validate. We're not going to gaslight people. But when it comes to shame and like toxic shame and the unworthiness, a lot of it was for me what I learned young, but what I self perpetuated, which
Exactly.
just became my own inner critic.
Yes. Right. Right. And I think the thing that I have less experience leading, but definitely have participated in is the embodied processing of these things,
Mm-hmm.
through movement, ritual, things like that, where we're not ever, we can't logic our way out of all of these problems either, right? I mean, even in therapeutic practices, right? Like EMDR. I mean, these are things that are engaging the physical body with the stories or the experiences or the traumas.
Course, in alignment with your words. I would just before our call, I was listening to Peter Levine, who talks a lot about somatic processing. And because
Yes.
I'll be putting a video out on shame because I'm talking too much about shame. I don't want to leave people in this really painful state. So I'm like, okay, I need to give them resources that help them when we do bring ourselves, because there's this state dependent memory. It's like if we're going to allow ourselves to recall times
Yeah.
where we felt a certain way, it's like, gosh, when I started leaning into shame and allow myself to feel, I was like, remember all the times I felt that way and did a
Mhm.
little IFS on myself. Was like, well, let me go back and cuddle that person and then that person and then that person and like kick some ass over here and but also Peter Levine talks about shame as like the embodiment of shame is we tend to close down and look away. And one way to empower clients while working with them, like if you're in a shame state, like it's really tough to think clearly because you're just in that shame state, then your brain is actually clouded by that perception. And so to get people out of shame, utilizing the somatic response to shame is having them slowly erect their spine and get into a more empowered
Mhm.
position that he says the opposite of shame is like authentic pride. So not some like ego driven pride about I want you to think I'm better than you, but like I'm feeling proud of myself is how I interpreted it. And I say that because it was right after I read in the book Letting Go, it talks about pride and how not to get attached to pride. And like I was like, oh, these are conflicting messages right now, but to embody authentic pride of like I appreciate myself and that I'm worthy to be here.
And that, I think that brings us back to what we were talking about before, which is the how. I mean, something that I just cannot stop learning is the how makes all the difference.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you could say the word pride and you could be like, oh, pride is bad. And we can see places where pride is harmful, but a pride that is grounded, authentic, coming from a state of just like, I'm worthy.
Yeah.
The how of it makes a big difference.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
that
You,
demonstrates the flexibility, right? It's like it's not right or wrong. There's granularity that makes this more abstract.
yes. Are you doing that coach, the IFS coach training?
No, I'm
Oh,
not.
I wanted to, but I couldn't commit to it.
I'm doing trauma informed coaching and I am doing I'm doing a lot of work in trauma right now because when you said prisoner of your own mind, I became a prisoner of my mind and my body, where I went back to clinic and I wanted to vomit and I physically couldn't get myself to stay in a place to be able to capture the thoughts going with it. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm doing a lot of somatic work right now because the thoughts just they're just not even I'm not even able to capture them when I'm just in a very activated state. So I really I'm huge on embodiment, and I also wasn't able, it was so fascinating because the reactions were so intense so quickly that I couldn't even do it just a tiny bit for a really long time. So developing self-compassion
Mhm.
and self-trust that you've already brought up. It's like those steps needed to happen where I knew I could keep myself safe. I knew I could be there for myself, have my own back. And then meeting people like yourself, I knew my community was there. So I didn't feel so vulnerable. Like I'm not alone in this. People understand. People have accepted me for who I truly am, especially the craziness that like, were we born of the same genetics, like the same cells? Like the things are just so crazy that I don't have to say much for me to trust that you understand.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
We left a lot for the audience to take away. I'm curious, what would you like them to take away from our discussion
Oh
today?
gosh, right. I think what I would encourage people to do is think about their values as kind of an intuitive, iterative process. So intuitive meaning just checking in, like, does this seem real? How does it feel in my body? What emotions does it bring up? Like, how does it feel when I'm expressing this value? Um, And then iterative is sort of that like going back to them, being curious, have they changed? Do I need to refine it? Is there something here that maybe doesn't belong that I thought did? And to me, values are like a compass. It's part of the inner compass.
Yeah,
Values are one part of that, which is like just helps you orient to navigating your life.
I love that visual too. And for people who don't know about the inner compass, can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the Inner Compass program is a program that I developed with a colleague Chandra Bauer, who is a PA and a yoga teacher and a grief facilitator. And it's all around, I mean, we developed the program around our own experience of feeling like we didn't have an inner sense of direction and self-trust. And so it's the sort of the tools and experiences that we have found most helpful in developing that. And it's for women, in our experience, this is really common among women, especially as you've said, high achievers who've really often um, I don't ignored's not the right, been conditioned to ignore, yeah, what they want and what matters to them for the sake of being good, successful, yada, and you name it. The list goes on.
Yeah, in the Joy Diet, that's another book that by Martha Beck. Clearly have a lot of books over to my left. So the Joy Diet talks about like giving yourself treats.
Hmm.
And um, one of the things that comes up in this book is doing the opposite of, so if we think that we need to be good, like
Hmm.
what will be the opposite of that? And like the treat could be like being that rebellious side. We've been instructed to be good for so long. And also realizing I've been instructed to be good, to follow all the rules, and that was a way to control and oppress me. And so one of my mentors told me there's a difference between being nice, like the nice people pleaser, and being kind.
Yes,
Sometimes boundaries are kind, people pleasing is nice. Which one would you prefer?
exactly.
But
Exactly. And boundaries are all about communicating what's important to you. Like values are essential to communicating boundaries because you have to know what's important to you to
yep,
express that to someone else.
yep, yep. Absolutely. And that self-abandonment, I find that when people have been abandoning themselves for so long, that setting boundaries is really, I mean, like you said, the values is important to know where your boundaries would even start. But when you are used to abandoning yourself, like those boundaries become soft. And if we have variable boundaries or we're constantly allowing people to cross our boundaries, that reinforces in our brain that we're not worthy of maintaining our own boundaries. So
Mm.
when I started creating boundaries that felt uncomfortable. And when people are like, well, why is this so uncomfortable? Like, because we've been conditioned to not create boundaries. We're afraid that we're going to be looked at poorly or that people are going to abandon us because we make them feel a certain way, but we can't make people feel any way in particular. We can be poop faces, we can be mindful of how we might engage with people, but their responses are theirs. They are impacted by so much more than just our presence. And so for me, in honoring, like the first time I didn't go to a meeting that I thought, I'm not going to this meeting. I do not want to be there. I'm not treated well at this meeting. I'm not going. Well, the drama I had after that, skipping that was like three
More,
hours.
more drama.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think the meeting was 30 minutes to an hour. The drama after me not going, the guilt, all of that. But the more I did it, the more I'm like, you know what? I didn't need to be there. The more I saw that the repercussions were not harmful. Like they didn't need me to be there. I just always spent so much time sitting there, often being berated or ignored. So I was like, I'm not
Mhm.
going to continue to endorse showing up for these things. But
Mhm.
just that knowing that if it feels bad because it's new, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it's new and what's coming up for us in those moments.
Yes. Yeah, it's like practicing with low stakes
Hmm.
challenges. Like I can think of a client I had who just, yeah, was, I mean, perfectionist, putting, I mean, this could describe a lot of people, right? Putting all this pressure on her to always do well and really well, excellent. And, but it wasn't serving her. And so we talked about whether there was maybe a small thing she could drop the ball on
Hmm.
just to see what happened. And she did. And I mean, she didn't even drop the ball. She just like did like 60% instead of 100%.
Hmm.
And she definitely felt judgmental of herself after. And then she's like, but then, I practiced self-compassion and I, interrogated my thoughts a little and I realized like it wasn't that big of a deal. And she's like, I'm not sure I'll do it again anytime soon, but it like started the process, right? Of
Yeah.
like, try it once, see what happens.
I would love to leave that as a challenge for the members here who think that they can't tweak a little bit and give up the reins of needing to strive for quote unquote the top tier of perfection and challenge them. Say, what is it costing you to have
Mhm.
this belief that we need to show up quote unquote perfectly? Like, what meaning has that been serving in your life? And like, what would be the fear of giving up that identity?
Mhm.
I have a lot that comes up for me, but I'm curious what comes up for you, but I'm also curious what's going to come up for the people listening. And of course, for the many people who may say, how the heck do I work with Sarah? She's amazing. How can they do that?
I have a website. So you can find me there, Sarah Weber, two B's, mdcoaching.com. Um, yeah, I love specifically working with folks who are ready to have perfectionism not be in the driver's seat anymore. And uh, start living life on their own terms. So
I love that. Even the contemplation, like if you feel guilty about saying that, I would say head on over. Like, oh no,
you're
oh no,
freaked out by
no.
not having perfectionism in the driver's seat, you might consider trying it out.
I think that is the one who actually is feeling the most resistant to that comment, I think is the one who will find most value in doing that. So thank you for offering that and to inviting them to come on over to your website. I will have that linked in the description below. So there, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me and for this wonderful discussion today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you.
And for the audience, please share your insights, your reflections, and any questions in the comments below. We love to hear from you. Until next time.